Hi everyone, we're back with JoergSprave's Instant Genghis Khan. This has been an extremely popular item. My recent video a few days ago has completely blown up, and Joerg's original video has been exceptionally popular as well. A lot of people in the comments have been absolutely taken away at how freaking awesome this tool is, and I'm not one to disagree. It's been absolute fun using it. I've had a bit more time with it now. I'm starting to see a few limitations with it, but overall the concept and design are just fun and amazing, and it really changes the way you think about doing archery. Now, as part of our discussions, a lot of people have hypothesized about, well, firstly, why didn't people invent tools like this in real history, and what would happen if they did? Now, bearing in mind, this is completely ahistorical. This never existed until Joerg came up with it. So all of this is a thought experiment. It's hypothetical. So this discussion is all in good nature. But it does raise some interesting educational points, and I would like to actually go through some of these key points to perhaps educate you a bit more on the context of archery historically, as well as some misconceptions which people have about why things may or may not be useful. In regards to historical precedent, some people might make the connection between the magazine, the multiple shots, the feeding system, to the Chinese repeating crossbow, or the chukonu. That was a real weapon. It was used. We have documents and records and images of this weapon, but that weapon had a particular purpose and had particular weaknesses, which are similar to how this might have struggled had this been used in real life. So there are three main areas which people have covered in terms of the perceived advantages of this tool, and I'm going to address each one in turn and why I think they would not be advantageous and why this probably would not have been workable in real life. The first perceived advantage is speed, and this seems very obvious. Shooting faster is a good thing. This particular tool allows you to shoot several arrows extremely quickly. Now, there is a downside, of course. You have 4 bolts. I'd imagine if you made a military version, it could be 6 or 8 or whatever you can modify. But you have a rapid burst of shots, and then you have a long downtime when you need to reload arrows. So that's not unlike a rifle or a shotgun where you have several bullets or shells, and then you have to reload or top up. But you have a tactical limitation in how many shots you can shoot at once. Now, that's not impossible to work around. I'm sure there are ways in which you can adopt this weapon to use that advantage and disadvantage. And I mentioned in my previous video, things like fire by rank or volley firing with multiple ranks, shooting and reloading in turn. That could work. But the main thing I want to talk about is whether this kind of speed is really that useful. Now, this may be reopening the speed shooting debate, and for those who haven't followed this channel, there's a lot of captivation and wonder at how fast people can shoot. And often the discussion will prioritize speed over all other things. And we have to remember that in archery, especially historical and military archery, speed isn't the only criteria. The pillars of archery not only include speed, but also power and accuracy, which will flow on to the later points in this discussion. But the ability to shoot extremely quickly has diminishing returns. Now, the first disadvantage of this tool is, as I said before, it is a burst fire weapon. So you only have the ability to shoot 4, in this case, only 4 bolts at once before you have to reload. Now, compare that to even an average archer who knows how to shoot a bow quickly, and this is normally talking about the Asiatic styles of archery, shooting with thumb draw or loading arrows from the right side. A typical archer pulling an arrow from a quiver and shooting it can do so at around 3 seconds per shot. The extremely fast shooters can do it under 2 seconds. So that can be done and sustained to a certain degree, though there are diminishing returns over time, and especially if you use heavier bows, then that rate of fire becomes unsustainable. So archery hasn't really been measured in speed. Speed is a measurement of skill, but it's not something which was universally applied. Not every style of archery adopted speed as a primary function or as a main concern. So we shouldn't just look at speed and go, the faster you shoot, the better it is. And what you find is your ability to shoot quickly is overtaken by the need to place the aim shots or to take your time to recover between shots and so on. And you might see in my demonstrations, while I can shoot quite quickly, I am bound to actually aim at the target and take my time to squeeze through and shoot correctly. And these things might make more of a difference to the quality of the shot than just shooting quickly. There is a purpose and value in volume of fire. So if you have like lots of archers shooting quickly, there are benefits. But being able to shoot this quickly, as in like pang, 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 or pew, 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 I think that doesn't have a lot of universal appeal. Most people will probably just shoot at a fairly relaxed pace, just fast enough, but not too fast. So that maximum speed capacity or the burst, I don't think has a lot of value in a realistic scenario. And just to reiterate, I don't think speed shooting is useless. People seem to think that we have this anti-speed shooting tirade and we dismiss speed as useless. No, that's not true. Speed as a function, and all techniques and methods have some kind of function and purpose. My point is that you don't need to be super, super fast. You just need to be fast enough. And I think this tool, despite its burst potential, is a bit excessive in what most people would find useful in a real situation. Now, the second issue we have to talk about is power. Now, this particular tool was designed by Joerg to use his 18-pound Chinese bow, which I share as well. And it's exceptionally fun with a light bow. But light bows are very easy to use. Again, people who watch these videos tend to overlook the power of the bow. If you're shooting a heavier bow, it's going to be slower. Now, in theory, if you have the manual dexterity to pull a string or knock arrows, you can shoot exceptionally fast. But it's very tiring. In my previous video, I did try this with a 40-pound Mongolian bow, and that was strenuous. Now, I can shoot a 40-pound bow, I can shoot a 50-pound bow, but you get to the point where the heavier you go, the more difficult it is to pull it back and let it go. It just takes a lot more out of you. Archery is very much dependent on your strength and conditioning, especially in your back muscles. And we have to remember that historically, the bows used for military purposes were in excess of 70 pounds. The war bows, which people are most familiar with, for example, the English war bows, would have been in excess of 100 pounds, 120 to 160, up to 200. Even the Asiatic war bows used by, for example, the Turks or the Mongols or the Chinese would have been from 80 to 120 pounds, roughly speaking, with some exceptions. So I imagine, of course, that a trained, experienced warrior had the capacity to shoot these bows fairly rapidly, but to a certain extent. I will say with certainty that people who do shoot 160-pound bows or 200-pound bows do have a hard cap. You can shoot perhaps 6 arrows in 1 minute, which is fairly slow pace compared to all the speed shooters you see. But after a minute or two, you're flat out. You just can't shoot anymore. That's one of the concerns I have about using this in a real battlefield context. This is the fact that after like 5 shots or like a whole magazine, maybe 8 shots, you're wrecked. You might shoot this very quickly with a 15-pound bow, but if this was a 100-pound bow, you might not get more than 1 shot in 10 seconds or 1 shot in 30 seconds. It's that exhausting, and I just can't understate the difficulty and the requirements to train up to shooting a heavy bow. So people who you see shoot extremely quickly are most likely using light bows. At best, some of the really skilled shooters like Mihai Cozmei are using like 40-pound bows. Some might use maybe 50-pound bows, but not necessarily pulling all the way back either. So there are some sacrifices which must be made in order to achieve that level of speed, and that normally means a lack of full power, which when you're shooting for fun, nothing wrong with that. If you're shooting against unarmored targets, then it might still be effective, but it does limit how effective and how versatile you can be as an archer. The third perceived advantage is convenience, and this is something which even Joerg mentioned in his video. One of the advantages is that you can have multiple bolts in the magazine, ready to go. You won't accidentally discharge it, and you can keep it around for home defense, certainly. The other thing that can be very convenient is that you don't need to train people to shoot quickly. I mentioned before that highly skilled archers could shoot very quickly, but this would require years of training and experience. Something like this can be picked up by basically anybody, and you can shoot, load without really thinking about it. Put in more bolts, and you can have a militia army with minimal training with rapid fire bows. That seems ideal. The problem is that we already have a historical weapon that meets these parameters: the crossbow. Crossbows have been used for thousands of years. Bronze Age China, the Gastrophines in ancient Greece, the arqueballista in Rome, the medieval crossbows, and so on. And in many places, crossbows were much more preferred compared to bows. And crossbows were popular and widespread in some regions because of that very reason. It was convenient, it was easy to use, it was easy to train with. You didn't need a high level of training or skill to use a crossbow to bring down an armored fighter. And some places were particularly known for crossbows. For example, the Genoese crossbows were used as mercenaries across Europe. And while crossbows were not adopted everywhere, some cultures like the Saracens or the Arabs did not like the crossbow. They considered it to be like the Frankish bow or the European bow. They preferred the traditional recurve bow. But in China, for example, they coexisted. You had crossbows and you had normal bows. But that perceived advantage was definitely there. Bows required more skill and training, whereas crossbows were easy to use. So we can't deny that the crossbow's existence validates the need for convenience and ease of use. But that's probably why you wouldn't see a repeating bow. Repeating crossbow? Yeah, the Chukonu. But again, as I said before, that had limitations. The Chukonu was known to be a low draw weight because to operate the mechanism, it could only work when you're loading by hand a light draw weight, perhaps less than 30 pounds, using very light bolts, which were perhaps poison tipped. But the real crossbows, which were used in battle more widely, were easily hundreds of pounds. They required someone's entire body weight to pull up using a hook, or use a special tool, or use a windlass. That's the power we're talking about. Now, this will obviously slow down the rate of fire, but if your one shot can bring down an armored fighter, then that was worth it. Point being is that if you were going to create a magazine and a repeating mechanism, you wouldn't do it for a bow. A crossbow, yeah, they did, had some uses, but there's no real advantage about creating an automatic bow or a loading mechanism for a bow. You may as well put a stock and a trigger and make it a crossbow. Now, there are other smaller technical reasons, given that this is just a mock-up which Joerg made and works. Things like what arrows you can use, what arrowheads you can use, the size of the magazine. Now, these things, I imagine, if this was a real military design, could be worked around or developed and actually improved upon. I don't really think that this would have a place in history. I don't think history would be changed had this existed, or if Joerg time traveled. If you talk about the Mongols, for example, well, they kind of already conquered most of the world, so I don't think this would have made a huge difference. And just the very fact that the bow by itself is such a versatile tool, especially with people in cultures who spent their lives with bows, who lived and died by the bow. This would be unnecessary. People could shoot before they could walk. They were very proficient. They could adapt the bow for more purposes. This is kind of like the training wheels of a bow. If you're going to shoot really quickly and learn to aim and load quickly, then I guess this could really work. But in terms of practical purpose, I don't think this would really have been a historical thing. I don't think it would have been that useful. It is a fun thought experiment, and as a device, it's fun to use, but it's quite redundant. That's my opinion. Of course, if you have your own opinion or you disagree with me, feel free to discuss below. Like I said, don't take this too seriously. We know this wasn't real. It's a thought experiment. It's a bit of a fantasy geek out, like I said before in my other video. But it's a lot of fun. If it really makes you think about what could have happened, then we've achieved our goal. And overall, again, a great bit of fun. I hope there's something more with this and more people get a chance to try their own. Anyway, I hope you found this discussion interesting and thought-provoking and somewhat educational. If you have any questions or further comments, just add them below. This is NUSensei. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.